Hello, this video is an A-level maths video. It's on the Year 1 statistics material. We're going to look at chapter 1 of the textbook, which is all to do with data collection. And this is section 1.1, where we're going to introduce ourselves to some very important vocabulary and definitions to do with things called populations and samples. So let's start off by looking at some of these really important definitions that we need to know. I've put three of them up on the screen here. In a statistical investigation, there's always a group of things that we want to find out about. Those things could be anything at all. It could be people, it could be objects, numbers, lots and lots of things that we might want to find out about. And that entire group is known as the population, the thing that we want to find out about. Now, if we want to perform a census, what that means is that we're going to look at every member of that population. So every person or every object that we're interested in, we're going to look at data from all of those things. And if we do that, we call that making a census. However, we may not want to do that. There may be times when we just want to look at some members of the population, but we still want to use those members of the population to say something about all of the population. When we do that, we call that a sample. So to help you understand what I mean by all this, what I've got an example on the screen here. I've pulled up my spreadsheet and I've got some actual real data. This is some weather records from Perth in Australia. It's actually the daily mean air pressure and it's taken for every day between May and October 2015. Okay, so these are the actual items of data here, and because we're looking at every single day between those, we could say that this would be our population, if you like. If we wanted to say something about what the air pressure was like in Perth between May and between May and October 2015, then we would look at this entire set of data, and that's called our population. However, if we wanted to say something about the population, but we didn't want to, for any particular reason, look at all of the items of data, we could take ourselves a sample. And here I've just taken a sample of 10 of the items of data from our population, and I've created this sample over here. And we may instead choose to analyze just this sample of data over here as opposed to the whole population. So what I'd like you to do now is have a think about why might we want to use a sample rather than the census to find out about a population, and maybe what's the downside, what are the disadvantages of using a sample rather than the census to find out about a population. I'd like you to pause the video in a second and think about that, and I want you to spend a bit of time thinking about this. Try and think of as many things as you can and write down as many things as you can, and if it helps, try and think of some real life examples to illustrate what you're thinking here. Okay, so hopefully you've had a good amount of time to think about this. I'm just going to go through some of the things you might have written down here. So I've written some on my paper here. Advantages of using a sample. Well, you could have said it's just quicker. And I'm not necessarily talking about quicker to analyze there. I'm talking about quicker to collect the data itself. So, you're not collecting as much data, therefore it's going to be quicker to do. For similar reasons, might be cheaper. Sometimes it's quite expensive to do a survey and analyze data, and also to sort of collect that data as well. So overall, just less effort, so using a sample is just less effort in general because you've got not so much data to analyze, not so much data to collect. One other thing that you might have thought of, which I think is quite an interesting one, is that a census is impossible if the items are used up as part of the testing process. So, for example, we could be thinking about maybe I want to consider the life of the batteries in my calculator. So I might go to the battery factory. I might sort of decide that I want to look at all of the batteries that are coming off the production line. So the whole population would be all of the batteries. But I can't test all of the batteries, because by testing all of the batteries, that means that I'm going to use up all of the batteries. And it means I'm not going to have any batteries left to go into people's calculators. So quite often the testing process will involve using up or destroying or damaging the items in some way. And in those situations, it's impossible to use a census. So what might be the disadvantages of using a sample rather than the census? What's the downside of doing a sample? Well, there's really just one really important downside, which is that it may not accurately reflect the whole population. The sample we choose may not be representative of the whole population. And this is something which is a real issue with statistical analysis. Whenever we take a sample and we try to use that sample to say something about the population, we just need to be very careful to try and make sure that that sample does accurately reflect the whole population as much as possible. So here is a really important word that we need to know what it means here. We say that if a sample does not accurately reflect the population, we say that that sample is biased, or it contains bias. And in a second, I'll ask you to consider an example of when a sample might be biased or not. So here you go. Have a look at this question here. I've got a set of data here, and then we've got a very small population, only 20 items of data in our population, but I've taken 3 samples there. I'd like you to consider whether each of those samples are indeed representative of the whole population, and whether any of them are indeed biased. Okay, so what do you think? What do we think about each of these 3 samples? Do we think they're biased or not? Well, I think if we look at, for example, sample A, looking at the spread of numbers that we've got there, the spread of numbers seem to go sort of fairly similar to the spread in the actual full set of data for the entire population. So I would say that doesn't seem too biased. If we look at B, sample B, well, clearly what we've done in sample B is I just took the first 5 numbers in the set of data. So I just took the lowest 5 numbers, the smallest leaves there, and clearly that's not going to represent the whole population. It's only going to represent, you know, the smallest leaves in the population. So that is, I would say, a very biased sample. C, well, looking at that again, the spread there seems fairly reasonable. There's quite a lot of 2.2s in the data there, so it's not too unreasonable that our sample might have a couple of 2.2s in it. So I would say, I'm going to say that that one is not too biased. Just 1 or 2 more definitions we need to know about here. So each individual item in a population that could be sampled, that's known as a sampling unit. And then when each item in a population is given a unique name or reference number, the list of those names or reference numbers is often referred to as a sampling frame. So to see what that actually means here, let's take a look at this example. We've got an example here. We've got vacuum cleaners being produced at a factory. They each have a unique serial number, and the factory wants to take a sample of vacuum cleaners for a quality control test. So what would be the sampling units, and what would be a suitable sampling frame? So let's have a look at how we can answer these questions here. So the sampling units for this particular one here, well, it's just the individual items in the population. So our sampling units are going to be the vacuum cleaners themselves. So each vacuum cleaner is a sampling unit. Okay, and then what would be the suitable sampling frame here? Well, the sampling frame is just the list of all of those serial numbers on those vacuum cleaners. So it's the list we can refer to when we're trying to come up with our sample. Okay, quick question for you to have a go at here. Here's another situation. I'd like you to identify the sampling units and the sampling frame. Okay, have you had a go at this one? What you should have said here is the sampling units in this situation are the members of the sports club. So I'll just write here members of the club. And the sampling frame would be the list of all of the members' names. And we've reached the end of the video. If you want to get yourself a bit more consolidation so you get really used to these vocabulary and these ideas, have a go at exercise 1A of the textbook. It's on page 3, and we'll be back shortly with the next video for the next section of the book.